The station was not the kind of place anyone dreamed about working. Verity 7 sat at the edge of neutral galactic territory like a forgotten tin can, bolted together by budget cuts and good intentions. It had a crew of 22 people, one broken coffee machine, and a view of deep space that was beautiful in the way most lonely things are, big, quiet, and a little sad. Calvin Harris had been stationed there for 3 weeks. Everyone called him Cal. He was 19 years old, thin-shouldered, with dark eyes and the kind of face that people forgot in crowds. He had graduated near the top of his communications class, but near the top did not get you posted to the good stations. It got you posted to Verity 7 that he did not complain. That was not really his style. He read old paperback novels he had brought in a duffel bag, kept his workspace tidy, and did his job quietly. The older crew members liked him because he listened more than he talked. The younger ones liked him because he shared his instant noodles without being asked that IT was on a Tuesday, station time, that everything got strange. The alert came in at 0340 hours. A Javori Royal vessel had suffered a catastrophic engine failure 6,000 kilometers from Verity 7. It was dropping fast and hard, and it needed immediate assistance. The Javori were not the kind of species you ignored. They were one of the oldest civilizations in the known galaxy, tall, silver-skinned, with faint bioluminescent patterns that moved across their bodies like slow light underwater. They had been traveling the stars when humanity was still drawing animals on cave walls. They were proud, careful, and they did not often come this close to human-operated space. The command deck went from half asleep to full panic in about 40 seconds. Commander Yates, a broad woman with close-cropped hair and the permanent expression of someone doing math in their head, started barking orders the moment the alert hit. Docking protocols. Medical prep. Diplomatic liaisons. Everyone had a role. Cal's role was supposed to be monitoring communication frequencies. But when the Javori survivors came aboard, 12 adults in varying states of shock and injury, it turned out there was a 13th passenger that nobody knew what to do with. She was small. That was the first thing Cal noticed. Small even for a child, which she clearly was. Her silver skin still had the soft, unformed look of the very young, and her bioluminescent markings were faint and irregular, more like scattered sparks than the deliberate patterns the adults wore. She stood in the middle of the docking bay, surrounded by emergency personnel and frantic adults, and she was completely, utterly still. She was not crying. She was not moving. She was just standing there with enormous dark eyes, watching everything with the careful stillness of a creature that had learned, very recently, that the world was much bigger and much scarier than it had seemed that morning. Harris. Commander Yates appeared at his elbow. I need someone to sit with the child. Everyone else has an actual job right now. Cal looked at the small silver girl. She looked back at him. Yes, ma'am, he said. That he walked over slowly, the way you might approach a stray animal, not rushing, not making sudden movements. He crouched down to her level, which put him low enough that his knees complained about the docking bay floor. He did not say anything right away. He just sat there with her for a moment, in the noise and the chaos, being still. After a while, she said something in Javori. Her voice was very small. I don't know that one, Cal said honestly. I only know about 6 words in your language and most of them are greetings. He paused. Are you hurt? She shook her head. That much she understood. Okay, he said. Good. That's good. He thought for a second, then reached into the chest pocket of his uniform and pulled out a battered paperback. I was going to read this later, but, do you want to hear a story? I don't know if you'll understand all of it. But stories kind of work even when you don't know all the words. She looked at the book. Then she looked at him. Then, very carefully, she sat down on the floor of the docking bay next to him. Cal opened the book and started reading. It was about a spider who made words in her web to save her friend's life. He read slowly, pointing at words sometimes, making the voices of different characters slightly different so she could follow along even without knowing the language. The chaos of the bay went on around them. Nobody bothered them. Somewhere around the 3rd chapter, her shoulder came to rest very lightly against his arm. She had stopped watching the room and started watching the page. Her name, he learned later through a translator, was Syra. Third princess of the imperial bloodline. She was the equivalent of 6 years old in human developmental terms, and she was, in every technical sense, one of the most important children in the known galaxy. She spent 2 days on Verity 7 while her escort was repaired. Cal was assigned to her for both of them. He taught her the names of Earth animals, drawing them badly in the margins of his notebook: a dog, a duck, a horse, something that was supposed to be a whale but looked more like a sad balloon. She pointed at his drawings and repeated the words carefully. Her English improved, word by word, the way a person learns a language when they actually want to use it. On the morning she was leaving, she tugged on his sleeve. He crouched down again, she said, in slow and careful English, every word chosen like she had practiced it. When I grow up, I will marry you, Earth boy. The 2 junior officers standing nearby both looked away very quickly, the way people do when they are trying not to laugh. Cal felt his face go warm. He scratched the back of his neck. Yeah, he said. Okay. You focus on growing up first, alright? That's the important part. She gave him a look that was extremely dignified for a 6-year-old, then turned and walked back to her escort with her chin up and her shoulders straight. Cal stood there watching the Javori ship pull away until it was just a light in the dark, and then not even that. He stood there a little longer than he needed to, then he went back to his station, filed his duty report, and filed the whole thing in the back of his mind under strange things that happen in space. He did not throw away the notebook with the drawings. 20 years is a long time. Long enough to change everything, or long enough for nothing to change at all, depending, mostly, on who you are and what you did with the years you had. Calvin Harris had done things with his years. He had served on 4 different ships, completed 2 tours in the outer colonies, earned a commendation for something involving a communications blackout during a meteor storm that he never fully explained to anyone. He had also been in one long relationship that ended quietly and without much drama, which was somehow worse than if it had ended loudly. He had adopted a dog named Biscuit, who was fat, slow, and completely uninterested in anything that was not food or sleep. Now he was 39, stationed back on Earth, working a desk job in the Orbital Communications Division out of Houston. The office was on the 14th floor of a building that smelled like recycled air and old coffee. His window faced a parking structure. He had put a small plant on the sill to compensate. The plant was not doing well. His closest friend at work was a woman named Donna Ruiz, who sat 2 desks over and had strong opinions about everything, including Cal's general approach to life, which she described as romantically retired. "You're 39, she told him one afternoon, spinning in her chair to face him. "Not 99. I have Biscuit," Cal said, without looking up from his screen. "Biscuit is a dog, Cal. Biscuit is a great dog. That's not the point." He looked up then, gave her the flat look he had perfected over 2 decades of being gently hassled by people who meant well, and went back to his screen. Donna shook her head and spun her chair back around. This was a conversation they had, in various forms, about once a month. Cal's days had a rhythm to them. He arrived at 0800. He translated deep-range signals, filed reports, attended briefings that could have been emails. He ate lunch at his desk most days, usually something from the place downstairs that made a decent enough sandwich. He left at 1700, stopped to pick up food for Biscuit, went home, read for a while, slept. Repeated that it was not a bad life. He was careful not to think about it too hard. The communiqué arrived on a Wednesday. It came through the standard diplomatic channel, which meant it was flagged, sorted, and put into the interstellar correspondence queue like everything else. Except it was not like everything else. Whoever processed it that morning flagged it red, meaning urgent, meaning unusual, meaning someone needed to look at it immediately. That someone turned out to be Cal's commanding officer, Commander Leon Ash, a lean and careful man who had run the Houston division for 6 years and was not easily surprised by anything. He was surprised by this. The communiqué was from the Javori Imperial Court. That alone was unusual. The Javori sent formal diplomatic messages to Earth maybe twice a decade, and those were mostly ceremonial. This one was different. It was sealed with the crest of the first royal house, which meant it had not come through any standard channel. It had come directly. It stated, in formal and precise language, that a member of the imperial family would be dispatching an envoy to Earth for what it described as a matter of imperial personal significance. It requested cooperation from Earth Command and the clearance of appropriate diplomatic protocols, and then, buried in the second-to-last paragraph, almost as an afterthought, except nothing in a Javori imperial communique was ever an afterthought, there was a name. The envoy was coming to see one Calvin Harris, formerly of Deep Space Station Verity 7, currently assigned to the Houston Orbital Communications Division. Leon read the name 3 times. Then he called Cal into his office. Cal came in, looked at Leon's expression, and felt the specific unease of a person who has done nothing wrong but whose past has apparently decided to surface unexpectedly. Leon slid the communique across the desk without a word. Cal picked it up and read it. He read it again. He got to his own name and went very still. Harris, Leon said, leaning back in his chair in the way he did when he was being deliberately patient. Do you have any idea what you did 20 years ago? Cal set the communique down on the desk. He thought about a small silver girl sitting on the floor of a docking bay, listening to a story about a spider. He thought about badly drawn dogs in the margins of a notebook. He thought about a voice, careful and deliberate, saying words in a language that was not her own. Yes, sir, he said. I think I might. Leon studied him for a long moment. The Javori Imperial House does not dispatch personal envoys for minor reasons. Cal, whatever happened on that station, it apparently meant something. I read her a book, Cal said. Leon blinked. You read her a book. And I drew her pictures of Earth animals. And I told her the names of the stars. He paused. She was scared and alone and everyone was busy. I just sat with her. The office was quiet for a moment. Outside, through the glass wall, the ordinary office hummed along, screens, keyboards, voices, the sound of a normal Wednesday going normally about its business. Leon picked up the communique and looked at it again. Earth Command is going to want a full briefing. The diplomatic office is already involved. This is going to be, he searched for the right word, complicated. Yes, sir. Are you ready for complicated? Cal thought about his plant on the windowsill, slowly dying. He thought about Donna telling him he was romantically retired. He thought about Biscuit, asleep in a patch of afternoon sun on his apartment floor, completely undisturbed by the universe's plans. Probably not, he said honestly. But I'll manage. Leon almost smiled. Dismissed, Harris. And, get a good night's sleep. Cal walked back to his desk. Donna took one look at his face and immediately wheeled her chair over. What happened? He looked at her for a second. Then he said, you know how you've been saying my life needs more interesting things in it? Yes, she said carefully. Well, Cal said, sitting down slowly, something interesting is coming. The Javori ship arrived at Earth's orbital platform on a Friday morning, and it made every human vessel in the vicinity look very small and very humble. It was long and pale, the color of old bone, shaped like something between a wing and a wave. The lights along its hull pulsed in slow, deliberate rhythms that the cultural liaisons immediately began photographing and analyzing. It moved without any of the mechanical noise that human ships made, just a slow, enormous grace, like a deep ocean creature that had never needed to hurry. Cal watched it arrive on the monitor feed in the prep room, standing next to Donna, who had somehow gotten herself cleared for the reception by claiming she was his diplomatic support. Commander Leon had looked at this claim with his usual careful expression and then signed off on it, because Leon understood, even if he did not say so, that Cal probably needed someone he actually knew in that room. It's beautiful, Donna said quietly, watching the ship dock. Yeah, Cal said. He was looking at it too, but he was also doing the mental math of what was on that ship, and his stomach was doing something uncomfortable. His dress uniform had been pressed and cleaned. Donna had ironed it that morning in his apartment, loudly and with commentary. Biscuit had watched from the kitchen doorway with his usual expression of benign indifference. Cal had stood there drinking coffee and letting her fuss because he did not know what else to do with his hands. The reception hall on the orbital platform had been arranged to be, as the diplomatic briefing put it, culturally neutral. This meant it looked like no one's home, which was its own kind of statement. There were representatives from Earth Command, 3 different diplomatic offices, a cultural liaison team, 2 translators, and approximately 40 people whose exact roles Cal could not determine but who were all standing very straight and looking very serious. Cal stood near the center of the room because someone had told him to stand there and he had not had a better idea. The Javori delegation came through the main entrance in formal order, tall, silver-skinned, their bioluminescent markings moving in patterns that the liaison team was frantically noting down. They were impressive in the way that very old, very confident things are impressive, not by trying, but simply by being. And then, at the center of the delegation, was Syra. She was fully grown now, which meant she was tall even by Javori standards, a head taller than Cal, at least. Her silver skin had the settled, deliberate quality of an adult's, and her bioluminescent markings were no longer scattered sparks but slow, clear patterns that moved with the rhythm of her breathing. She wore formal imperial regalia that Cal could not have described accurately, layered and precise, in colors that shifted depending on the light. She held herself the way people hold themselves when they have spent 20 years being trained to lead, straight without being stiff, still without being frozen. She was, in every measurable sense, extraordinary. Cal was suddenly very aware of the fact that he was an average-height human man in a dress uniform that Donna had ironed. The formal greetings went on for a while. Cal stood where he had been told to stand and watched the room move around him. His name was announced at some point. He nodded at the people who looked at him. He tried to look like a person who had expected this and was handling it with dignity that he was not entirely sure he was succeeding, and then the formal portion of the greeting ended, and Syra crossed the room. She did not do it dramatically. She just moved through the space between them with the calm certainty of someone who had made a decision a long time ago and had simply been waiting to carry it out. People stepped aside for her without quite realizing they were doing it. She stopped in front of him. She was close enough that he had to tilt his head back slightly to look at her properly. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Her bioluminescent markings had slowed to almost nothing, a faint, even pulse, like a held breath. Then she said, in English so clear and careful it was obvious she had practiced it, "You do not remember me. But I remember you." "I remember you," Cal said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. Something shifted in her expression, small and controlled, but real. She continued. "You read me a story about a spider who made words in her web. You drew me a picture of something called a golden retriever. You told me the stars had names and pointed them out like they were old friends." The room was very quiet. 40-something people were holding their breath. "Charlotte's Web," Cal said. "The spider's name was Charlotte." "I know," Syra said. "I found the book afterward. I have read it 4 times." She let that sit for just a moment. Then she straightened, and her voice took on the quality of something formally stated, not cold, but deliberate. "Among my people, a declaration made sincerely by a child is considered a statement of intent. When an adult, it becomes a question, not a demand, and not a claim. I am not here to hold you to words you did not speak." She paused. "I made a declaration when I was young. I have carried it for 20 years. I came here because I felt that honor required me to ask, in person, whether you might be willing to begin." The silence in the room was the kind that presses on your ears. Cal looked at her for a long moment. He thought about a small girl sitting on a docking bay floor, shoulder against his arm, listening to a story. He thought about 20 years of desk jobs and sandwiches eaten alone and a plant that was slowly dying on a windowsill. He thought about Donna, somewhere behind him, absolutely vibrating with contained emotion that he said, "Do you want to get coffee first? Or do the Javori skip straight to the big stuff?" The silence stretched one beat longer, and then Syra, in front of every diplomat, every officer, every aide, in the official record of Javori human relations, laughed that it was a real laugh, surprised out of her, and it changed her face completely. The formal composure cracked open for just a moment and there she was, the same person who had once sat on a cold floor and learned the word for duck, finding something genuinely funny in the middle of a moment that was supposed to be serious and historic and important. Somewhere behind Cal, he heard Donna make a sound that she immediately converted into a cough. "Coffee," Syra said, once she had recovered her composure, though her markings were moving faster now, brighter. "Yes. I think I would like that." The next several months were unlike anything Calvin Harris had ever experienced, and he had once spent 4 days inside a disabled ship with 3 other people and nothing to eat but emergency ration bars. This was harder. Javori courtship was not casual. It was not the kind of thing you could figure out as you went along, the way Cal had navigated most of the complicated things in his life. It had structure. It had specific stages, each with its own set of expectations and exchanges. It had a name in their language that translated, roughly, as the careful unfolding, which told you something about how the Javori approached things they considered important. Donna had taken it upon herself to become an expert. She sat at her desk surrounded by every piece of Javori cultural documentation that Earth's diplomatic archives had on file, cross-referencing it with direct notes from the cultural liaison team, making a document that she updated every time she learned something new. She printed out sections and left them on Cal's desk with handwritten annotations in the margins. She was, Cal thought, probably more prepared for this than he was. "Stage 2 involves a formal gift exchange," she told him one morning, not looking up from her reading. "The gift is supposed to reflect something true about the giver. Not expensive. True. What did I give in stage 1? You made her laugh in front of 2 governments. Apparently that counted. That was an accident. The Javori cultural notes say authenticity in stage 1 is considered highly favorable. So, accidentally, you did it right." Cal put his head in his hands briefly. Then he sat up and went back to work. The coffee meeting, as it turned out, had been the first of many. Syra had a schedule that was formally packed and politically significant: meetings with Earth Command, cultural exchanges, diplomatic sessions. But there were gaps, and in the gaps, she found her way to the small, neutral conference room on the orbital platform's lower level where Cal would bring 2 cups of something hot and they would sit across from each other and talk. She asked him about his life, the 20 years of it she had missed. She listened the way that people who are trained to gather information listen, completely, without interrupting, without looking away. He told her about the ships he had served on, the places he had been, the relationship that had quietly ended, the desk job, the dog. She asked careful questions. He answered honestly, including the parts that were not particularly impressive. "You stayed in service," she said, one afternoon. "You could have left. Many people do, after a certain number of years." "I was good at it," Cal said. "And it seemed like something worth being good at." She looked at him for a moment. "That is a very straightforward reason." "I'm a pretty straightforward person." "I know," she said. And the way she said it made it clear she did not mean it as a criticism. Not everyone was pleased with the situation. On the human side, there were people who found the whole thing suspicious: a mid-ranking communications officer getting the personal attention of a Javori imperial princess seemed, to certain minds, like it must have an angle. What was the angle? What did the Javori want? Several op-eds were written. Cal ignored them. Leon told him to keep ignoring them. On the Javori side, the resistance was quieter and more formal, which made it more dangerous. The most significant problem was a Javori noble named Lord Veth, a thin, precise man whose dislike of the situation was expressed entirely through official channels, which made it very difficult to address directly. He filed a petition with the Imperial Court arguing that Syra's presence on Earth for personal reasons was a misuse of Imperial diplomatic resources and requested her recall. Syra informed Cal of this the same day she learned of it. She told him calmly, which was her way, but he had spent enough time with her by then to notice when the calm was being maintained rather than natural. He thought about it for 3 days. Then he asked Donna for help. What followed was 4 nights of Donna buried in Javori legal archives while Cal made coffee and read over her shoulder and tried to understand the framework of a legal system built over thousands of years by a species that treated precision like an art form. Donna was good at this kind of thing in a way that Cal was not. She found patterns, made connections, flagged precedence with the calm focus of someone doing a puzzle they were determined to finish. On the fifth day, Cal submitted a formal counter-argument to Lord Veth's petition. It cited 3 specific Javori legal precedents, including one that was over 400 years old, which established that a member of the imperial family retained the right to conduct personal correspondence and personal visits without requiring justification to the court, provided those visits did not conflict with formal diplomatic obligations. It was airtight. It was written in the formal structure that Javori legal documents required, which Donna had carefully replicated. Lord Veth was forced to withdraw his petition, Syra found out 2 days later. She came to the conference room and sat down across from Cal and looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before. "You studied our law," she said. "Donna studied your law," Cal said honestly. "I mostly just signed it. But I read every word, and I meant every word." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, not looking away from him, "When I was on that station, 20 years ago, I was frightened. The adults around me were busy with their own fear. Nobody sat down." She paused. "The galaxy is full of powerful beings, Cal. It is not full of kind ones. And it is even less full of people who study 400-year-old law because someone they care about is being inconvenienced." Cal looked at his coffee cup. He was not sure what to say to that. "What's the next step?" he asked finally. "In the courtship process. What comes after the gift exchange?" She told him. He listened carefully, the same way she had always listened to him. "Okay," he said, when she was done. "Tell me how to do it properly." Her markings brightened, slow and steady, like a light being turned up in a quiet room. The morning of the ceremony, Cal woke up before his alarm, which was unusual. He lay in the quiet of his apartment for a few minutes, looking at the ceiling, listening to Biscuit snore from the end of the bed. Biscuit had, through a sequence of events that Cal had not fully authorized but also had not stopped, been smuggled aboard the orbital platform the day before by Donna, who had convinced the transport crew that he was a registered emotional support animal, which was technically true in the sense that Biscuit did, in fact, support emotional well-being, specifically Cal's, and specifically by being an uncomplicated presence in a life that had recently become very complicated. He got up, made coffee, and stood at the window for a while. Houston was still dark at that hour, the city light spread out below like a second set of stars, close and ordinary and familiar. He thought, 6 months ago, this was not his life. Then he thought, this is better. Donna arrived at 0700, which was earlier than he had asked her to come. She was carrying a bag with breakfast things and wearing an expression that was trying very hard to be practical and not quite succeeding. She sat him down, made him eat, adjusted his collar approximately 17 times while he sat patiently and let her, and then, when there was nothing left to adjust, she stood back and looked at him. "You look good," she said. "You're going to cry," he said. "I am absolutely not going to cry," she said, in a voice that suggested the opposite. Commander Leon Ash arrived an hour later. He came in, looked Cal up and down, and shook his hand. He held it for a moment longer than a standard handshake, which from Leon was practically a speech. Cal nodded. Leon nodded. They did not need more than that. The ceremony was held on the orbital platform's main assembly hall, a compromise location, half its decor arranged in the human tradition and half in the Javori one. The effect was strange and probably would not have satisfied a purist from either side, but it felt honest in a way that neither purely human nor purely Javori would have. Like something new being made from 2 things that did not originally belong together. There were dignitaries. There were representatives. There were cultural liaisons with their tablets and their careful expressions. There were people whose names Cal had been told and immediately forgotten, and people whose names he knew and would remember for the rest of his life. Syra was already there when he arrived. She stood at the front of the room, formal and composed, her regalia precise. But she turned when he came in, and her markings, those slow, speaking lights, shifted into a pattern the liaison team noted quietly was associated with welcome and relief. The ceremony itself was a Javori form called the Declaration of Continuance, not a wedding, not an engagement in the human sense, but a formal mutual commitment to proceed. To keep going. To choose, with full knowledge of what the choice meant, to move forward together. The Javori believed that this moment mattered more than the later, grander ceremonies, because this was the moment of honest choice, before ritual could dress it up into something easier to perform than to mean. At the center of the ceremony was the truth gift. Each participant offered something personal and honest, not ceremonial, not expensive, not chosen to impress. Something true. Javori typically gave curated memories, which their culture had a formal practice for presenting. Some gave composed verse. The cultural liaisons had given Cal a full briefing on what would be appropriate from a human participant, and the suggestions were thoughtful and genuinely helpful. Cal did not use any of them. He reached into the inside pocket of his dress uniform and took out a folded piece of paper. It was worn at the creases and slightly yellowed, the kind of paper that has been kept for a long time without quite being able to explain why. He unfolded it carefully and held it out. It was a drawing. A golden retriever, slightly crooked, with a lopsided grin and ears that were not quite symmetrical and paws that were more oval than round, sketched in pen on the back of what had once been a maintenance log sheet from Deep Space Station Verity 7. He had kept it. He was not entirely sure when he had decided to keep it. He just had. It had moved from his duffel bag to his desk drawer to a box of things he did not throw away, and had lived there for 20 years, surviving 4 ship transfers and 1 apartment move without ever quite making it to the bin. Syra took it from him with both hands, which was the Javori way of receiving something significant. She looked at it for a long time. The room was completely still, her bioluminescent markings went very quiet, a slow, even glow, held steady. The cultural liaison closest to Cal leaned in and murmured, "That pattern indicates deep emotional composure. It is considered one of the most sincere expressions they have." Cal nodded once. He kept his eyes on Syra. She reached into her own regalia and produced her truth gift. It was a star map, hand-inscribed on a material that was not quite paper and not quite fabric, in the careful, precise style of Javori cartography. It showed a section of deep space that Cal recognized after a moment, the region near the edge of neutral galactic territory. And there, marked in the middle of the map with a symbol that glowed faintly, was a point in space. The translator murmured the symbol's meaning, where it began. Verity 7. The station where a 19-year-old with a paperback book had sat on a cold floor with a frightened child and read her a story about a spider. Cal took the map. He held it the same way she had held his drawing, with both hands. The formal declaration was read. They each spoke their part in their own language, with translations running simultaneously for the assembled room. Cal's part, which he had practiced for 2 weeks, came out steady and unhurried, and he meant every word of it. When it was done, the room let out a collective breath. People began to speak, to move, to do the things people do when a moment of great significance has passed. And ordinary time resumes. Cal and Syra stood at the viewpoint at the edge of the hall, looking out at the stars. The earth hung below them, blue and patient. Beyond it, the stars were exactly where they had always been. He started pointing them out, the way he had done for a small girl in the bay of a forgotten station 20 years ago, naming them, telling their stories, treating them like old friends. She listened, and then she added names he did not know, stories from a history older than humanity's, and the stars gained new layers, new meanings, like words that suddenly have translations. Behind them, somewhere across the room, Donna was crying quietly into a glass of water and trying to look like she was not. Leon stood beside her, looking out at nothing in particular, saying nothing, which was his version of the same thing, and under the refreshment table, completely unbothered by the historic and significant event occurring around him, Biscuit was asleep on his side with his legs in the air, snoring softly into the carpet of the most important room in interstellar diplomatic history. The stars kept their old places. 2 people stood and named them together, and somewhere in the dark, the universe, ancient and enormous and mostly indifferent, seemed, just for a moment, to be paying quiet attention.